Welcome back to the Driveline R&D podcast. I'm Jack Lambert here with Marek Ramilo and Josh Heshka. We got episode 2 or 101, depending on who you ask. We're talking pitch modeling today. How we doing, fellas?
Good. We're supposed to bring drinks to research and
Uh,
drinks.
I guess I'm drinking a coffee, Kroger brand. Shout out to Cincinnati. You guys got anything?
Yeah, I'm 3 hours late. I thought we were supposed to be at. I thought we were recording on Eastern time, not Pacific time. I had my Raising Cane's Arnold Palmer, but that's long
Ooh,
gone at this point. Yeah, unfortunately.
It's a good one. We got Valley spring water, fancy kind.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
bougie.
yeah,
here we go.
out of the bottle. Yeah,
And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see my farmer's tan coming in underneath my shirt. So all the more reason to
Spending
watch
a
on YouTube.
lot of time backing up there, just sitting in the bullpen, catching rays.
Yep. Yeah, catching the tan. It's all right. Maybe I'll have a full tan by the time the spring training's over, but we'll see what happens.
There we go. Got to start off the season hot. Um, So, main thing we wanted to talk about today is pitch modeling, something that all three of us, being in the baseball operations department, takes up most of our job, either making models, iterating on them, or applying them to deliverables or research. So, just generally speaking, pitch modeling, for those who aren't familiar, is essentially trying to tie specific inputs to a pitch, whether that be thinking about where a pitcher releases the ball, the location of the pitch, how it spins, how hard it's thrown, tying all that into predicting the outcome of what will happen. So, previously, a method we took, a method that's very common, is people will decide how valuable this pitch is based off some sort of expected runs difference, whether that is the run value of a ball, a strike, an out, a home run, whatever it is, tie each specific event to a run value, and then use all the other factors to predict that run value, whether that those factors differ, stuff being just the release point, velocity, movement characteristics, location, just knowing where the location is, all to predict the value of a specific pitch and hopefully future success.
Yeah,
Heshka, Merrick, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to hop on that. I think I just to give a little bit more historical context. I think uh, what Jack mentioned about wanting to predict future success. I think that's the name of the game in a lot of ways, especially when we're talking about how teams apply these models in their own settings. Um, in the past, before advanced statistics, ERA is kind of the stat that matters in the sense of like we want to, or I guess runs against per nine is truly the stat that matters. Basically, how many runs do you allow? Because the game is decided based on runs. That's the currency of the game. But runs against per nine or ERA are both very bad predictors of future runs against per nine or ERA. So there's this advanced stats revolution where we start to remove some of these very, very noisy components of ERA and runs against per nine, where we see, defense matters a lot. The field you're playing in matters a lot. All these things are components that add noise to how much future success you can expect to have. Pitch modeling is basically another step forward that allows us to basically remove all. So, for example, you could throw a really good pitch, but the batter happens to make great swing. Maybe he was sitting on that pitch for whatever reason. Maybe he read your scouting report. But the point is, you could throw a pitch that is very, very likely to be successful, but for whatever reason, it's not successful. So modeling allows us to remove context even further to get to the point where we can hopefully predict who's a good pitcher and who's not a good pitcher way sooner than any of these advanced metrics. Same thing for a minor leaguer, right? So let's say we have the perfect, let's say a FIP is the perfect stat, and we know that which it's not. But let's say like on the major league level, we know, okay, really good FIP leads to a really good ERA in the future. But what about a really good FIP in high A? What about a really good FIP in double A? Pitch modeling allows us to say these guys that aren't even facing big league competition, we can still figure out how good that they, maybe not completely figure out. Obviously, we don't have all the pieces put together, but we can get a pretty good idea of how well they'll be able to compete at the big league level just based on these ball flight metrics. So these models provide a ton of value to teams, and as we'll talk about, provide a ton of value to us as we help develop athletes.
Yeah, I think baseball's been blessed relative to other sports just with the openness of data with PitchFX and then TrackMan, Hawkeye. Uh, I believe 2008 was the first time a paper was published on Stuff. I don't know if it referred to as Stuff Plus. Do either of you know the leader in that first post? Anyone got it?
2008.
2008.
I think it was around 2008, 2008 or nine.
Zito.
Oh, it's a good guess.
Is this pre Kershaw?
Yes, I believe
A couple
it was
years.
AJ Burnett that was
Wow,
the stuff leader in the OG pitch modeling. So just
that's crazy.
this goes way back, and this has been something that's been iterated on many times since then. We first had a stuff model in, I believe, 2018 or so. They've become really popularized lately, and like Heshka said, just really allow to compare everyone on the same grounds, regardless of the specific outcomes of what's happening. Whether a guy is throwing in low A, high A, a draft showcase, you can plug in their metrics to the model and get an idea for how good they are. One thing too that I think is valuable in these models is it takes a long time for a lot of stats to stabilize. And what we mean by stabilize is uh, for a metric to become reliable in that it is not being uh, not really not really being fed into by the context of the situation, but rather the true skill of the player. Marek, do you want to talk a little bit about the value of stuff and quick reliability from that perspective?
Yeah, well, the notion of figuring out, you know, how quickly can we gather a sample of stuff data and use that to project forward. I mean, we mentioned early on that you take a guy's FIP or some other observed statistic over a year and try to look at his next year ERA performance. I mean, that is one of the big gains from what we got and stuff is just really shrinking the amount of sample we needed to get to make those sorts of predictions. I don't have a precise number on the observed pitches to achieve that.
It's very for stuff. It is between 5 and 20 pitches, depending on the pitch type. At least
Yeah.
in our most recent model, it's incredibly quick, like within a
I
bullpen.
I had something like that in mind, but you hesitate to say because it's just such a shockingly small
Yeah,
amount of data that you need. But yeah, I mean, as far as not just computational cheapness of operating on that little data, but for a guy to be able to rip off a quick bullpen, like you said, and have a really good idea of how he ranks among his peers, how he projects going forward. That was, I think, among one of the bigger breakthroughs in modeling pitch quality in this way.
yeah,
But I think it's also important to note the limitations of most of what we've been talking about, even kind of the advances in how teams are using it that Hedgekit detailed. All of those things were true in what we're calling kind of the prior convention. And what's exciting about 2025 as we look ahead and the work that we've been doing internally is a bit of a revamp in how we think about pitch modeling. Um, Before we move ahead to that, I mean, some of the things that were good about being able to distill pitcher quality and pitch quality into this, nice portable 100 scale and something that was interpretable in public as well. Um, I think there were challenges you mentioned, plugging in known inputs and producing a score, Jack, as a strength, and it certainly is, but then you risk it being a little too black boxy and not
right.
really understanding the dynamics of, I know more velo naturally is going to improve my stuff. But unless you drill down into feature importances, and those are kind of an artifact of the model after it's been run, it's hard to know up front, what knobs you have to turn to achieve exactly kind of the stuff profile that you want. Directionally, it's pretty well defined, and that's our job as researchers to make that known. But we think that by breaking things down into components, you gain a lot of insight that answers very precisely, what aspects of these pitch are good. Is it because it's creating lifts? Is it because of
Yep.
its ability to generate negative run value in zone, things of that nature?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
what Merrick's kind of getting at there is in recent years, these stuff models have be basically converged on kind of plateauing and how good they are at predicting future success. It's pretty marginal difference, at least from the public models out there, in who's predicting what the best from season to season. But being a training facility, it's especially of interest for us specifically to understand exactly how each value is being achieved so we can identify the point that a pitcher needs to improve on and where that is. So I touched on previously how different run values that you're predicting can be achieved, whether that's through linear weights, which is basically taking the average run value of an event across all counts and out states, or if that's the delta run expectancy 288, which is the change in run value from a specific count out runners on base state to another state there. But Heshka is something you and I worked on a ton this offseason. We wanted to make things more modular and component based, as Marek said. Do you want to kind of walk through what that sort of approach to identifying a run value looks like?
Yeah, so I think there's two big things here, especially when talking about actionability, which I think is the biggest missing piece. With the way, obviously, there's been a push for making models as predictive as possible, as reliable as possible, which is great. Um, but I think you could have the perfect model, but if you can't figure out a way to teach a pitcher to improve his stuff to basically match what the model outputs as good stuff, it's not a very useful model. So there's two big pieces here. One is the point that Marek mentioned, which is when we talk about a component based approach. So a component based approach can walk through the tree. Traditionally, stuff models, a non component based approach would basically specifically stuff models here. So when we're talking about stuff models, I'm sure many people listening to this already know this, but stuff models only consider the ball flight metrics, meaning the velocity, the release point, the movement. It does not consider the location. It does not consider the count. It does not consider the base out state. So we're really trying to remove as much context as possible when we're talking about stuff. Traditionally, these models take these metrics, the velocity, the movement, the release point, and they just predict change in run value. So like what happened on that play? Change in run value, for example, is based on the base out state. So if a pitcher throws a pitch, and I believe the count state. So if a pitcher throws a 1-0 pitch that's hit for a home run, the change in run value is pretty substantial there, right? So you can basically take everything that happens, assign it a run value based on these linear weights that Lambert was talking about, and the traditional stuff models trained a model based on that change in run value. The new component based approach that we're using breaks things down a little bit further, which it should add a deeper understanding of what's actually going on. So the first step in the decision tree is, okay, pitcher throws a pitch. What's the probability that this pitch will generate a swing? Maybe it's a pitch, way outside the zone, and so the probability of a swing is very low. Maybe it's a pitch right down the middle, so the probability of a swing is very high. But that's useful information to know. Is okay, what's the probability that this pitch generates a swing? If it does not generate a swing, what's the probability that it's a called strike or called ball? Many people know this as well, but obviously the umpires are not perfect, right? So the zone that's called by umpires is traditionally more of a circle rather than an actual rectangular square. So we can basically generate the 50th percentile called strike zone, which is more of an oval or a circle. But that's useful to know, like when throwing a pitch, like is that pitch likely to get a called strike or is it likely to get a called ball? If the batter is likely to swing, what's the probability that's a whiff? What's the probability that it's a foul ball? What's the probability that's a ball in play? If it's a ball in play, what's the probability that it's a single, double, triple, home run, out? And summing all these pieces together allows us to develop a more full picture of what's actually going on. So like what Marek alluded to, knowing that a pitch has a certain expected run value of X, okay, well that's kind of useful, I guess. Like that's helpful. But the next step of knowing like it has an expected run value of X, but most of that comes from the fact that it's very, very likely to get a swing and miss outside of the zone. Okay, well now if I'm facing a batter who doesn't really swing at pitches outside the zone, maybe that pitch isn't going to actually be as effective as it would be otherwise, because it's the main component of that pitch that makes it successful may not match up very well against this particular batter.
Yeah.
So being able to break it down like that, I think, is extremely helpful. I can talk about the second piece in a second, but Lambert, I know you're about to jump in.
Yeah. I was just gonna touch on like the philosophical change here is more instead of predicting a value, let's predict the probability that different events will occur. And with that, can assign values to the events and sum that up based on the probabilities. And doing it this way, gets you that specific value broken up into components, as well as the component stats of your probability swing. If the pitch is out of the zone, is your X chase percentage. If there is a swing, your probability of whiff is your X whiff. Probability called strike, if there's a take, is your X called strike. So then it also is feeding in these uh, component metrics that are much more actionable for a pitcher post game to be able to look at. Okay, my pitch value was this in these areas. I excelled, and in my 3-2 counts today, I got screwed on 3 borderline calls. Like everything's going to be okay, or something like that. You can look at the specific parts of that. And yeah, Heshka, you want to go on your second point there?
Um, Yeah, no, I think that's an extremely good point, and I think it also helps from a development perspective, where maybe a guy has a bunch of pitches that can generate whiffs, which is great, but maybe we also want to develop a pitch for him that can get weak contact rather than a lot of whiffs, because maybe he's facing a batter that just won't swing and miss, right? Maybe he's facing, some guy like Luis Ariz or whatever that's just not going to swing and miss. So we need something else that's going to be able to get us over the edge. Maybe we need a pitch that can generate a lot of called strikes. So being able to break it down like that and round out a guy's arsenal a little bit better, I think is a very useful development tool. The
Do
other
you
aspect of this, yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry, real quick. Just I think it's an interesting perspective with you being a pitcher. Uh, I know in our conversations about Arsenal's, Marek, like I've kind of broken it down in my head just as an analyst as like as a pitcher, you need to be able to get whiffs, get called strikes, and weak contact. Do you kind of view it that way from your pitcher side of things? Like, are you viewing the pitches in your arsenal as tools to accomplish one of those 3 things? Am I missing something? Is it simpler than that? How do you kind of view that?
No, I think that's a good way to think about it, especially coming from someone who's like throwing from a funky slot. I feel like my goal is to minimize the number of pitches that a guy sees, and we can talk about this later with like the idea of familiarity, right? Where like part of my advantage is that I batters don't have a lot of familiarity with a really low release point guy. So if I'm throwing 5, 6, 7 pitch at bats because I'm like trying to throw the perfect pitch to strike a guy out and get a whiff, like I might actually be hurting myself because the batter's gaining familiarity and he might be able to take a pitch that he wouldn't have otherwise taken, or maybe he'll do damage on a pitch that he does otherwise may have swung and missed at or got weak contact on. So I'm trying to get out of at bats very early. So my first couple of first couple of pitches of an at bat, I'm trying to throw those pitches that are going to generate weak contact. I'm trying to like pound righties in. I'm trying to pound lefties in with the cutter. I'm not necessarily going for 3 straight whiffs. Now, if I can get a couple called strikes or get a couple foul balls, and then I'm in a 2-strike count, of course, yeah, I'm going to try to get a whiff. But all these different weapons are deployed at different times depending on the context. Especially the classic examples, like maybe I come in with a runner on first, 1 out, like should I try to go for 2 strikeouts, or should I lean into the fact that my sinker is an extremely effective ground ball pitch and just pound a righty at the bottom of the zone with it and like try to get that double play? I think having all these different weapons, and the exact opposite situation, maybe it's uh, bases loaded, no outs. I need to get some strikeouts, right? Or bases
Mhm.
loaded, 2 outs, even. I need to get a strikeout. So being able to have these different weapons to deploy in different situations, I think is a good way to think about it. And I think obviously for most pitchers, I'd say the weapon that gets swings and misses and strikeouts is probably the one that they would rely on the most. But starters, especially we talk about starters going deeper in the games, like if they can generate weak contact early in a bat, like that's going to allow them to go deeper in a game and get more outs for their team.
That all nicely falls out of realizing that this is an optimization problem that has costs or scarcity with every pitch that you throw. And I know you teased the familiarity and decay stuff that I will get into at other points in time. But yeah, if you think that you have an endless number of bullets, um, why wouldn't you rip the same pitch over and over again that's going to generate you the most whiffs? And I think a lot of um, the the narrative or the discussion around early stuff models was maybe that we were just only overvaluing or only valuing the pitches, the sweepers, the things in different ways that would generate CSW, or really just the W part of that. So is it fair to say that we're saying in this revamp, we are properly valuing pitches that get you negative run value in other ways and not just whiffs, and maybe the whiff heavy pitches were overvalued in the prior convention?
I would lean yes without going all the way in. Just that inherently in a stuff model, you don't know the location of a pitch. So it is not like we now are valuing probability of called strike perfectly accurately with a stuff model, because it's just not going to happen without knowing the end location of a pitch. But with that said, having the explicit ball and play model component that's predicting the probability of an exit velo launch angle bucket will account for that. The stuff can reduce the likelihood of damage on contact. So, just generally speaking, the high ride four seams are going to get more whiffs, and they're also going to get hit for more home runs. And the sinkers that are running a bunch and not don't have much ride at all are likely going to be hit for more ground balls. So we are accounting for some of those effects, which we found are actually somewhat predictable with stuff metrics, which there's largely been the use of FIP just claims it essentially isn't. The pitcher has no control over what happens in the field of play, and that's there's some truth to that, and that you don't control your defense or the park you play in. But we are finding that you have some of your exit velo launch angle uh, likelihood can be determined based on the shapes of your pitches. So that is definitely an
Very
intriguing
much so.
step
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's an important piece that the defense independent dips, I think is the term, that the all
Yep.
encompassing term, defense independent pitching statistics, is definitely outdated at this point. I know that people tried to make attempts at that with Sierra, but I think these pitch models are definitely a way of, even if it's not necessarily changing the valuation, I think it helps us develop a better understanding of what makes a certain pitch successful. And especially with combined with our full pitch model, which does include location and count, I think it does provide a lot more context as to, like, maybe if I can execute this pitch low in the zone, like that is going to give me more likely to give me a ground ball, especially if I throw it especially if it's my two seam or something like that.
This is
Yeah.
all really an extension of the phrase that you dropped earlier, Hechko, which was that run value is the currency of the game, which I've seen like a few people use that same idea, which is great. I mean, it really appeals to anybody that wants to think of um, navigating the RE 288 matrix as all that baseball is. You're just constantly making decisions to move you to the next space that is either creating the most runs or preventing the most runs. And obviously in uh, MLB organizations everywhere, you have people whose titles are things like run prevention or run creation, offensive, defensive coordinators. That is all we're really doing here. Not to say that baseball is played on a computer, but if one were to play baseball on a computer, that's all they'd be doing is navigating the RE288 matrix and optimizing those choices. But what is really good about at least dealing entirely in run values the way we're doing now is it flips the whole convention. Everything is entirely fungible from offense to defense. We can use the same component based approach to value hitters, to value the skills that hitters have. Maybe not exactly the way we're valuing pitchers, but the core principles of it are the same. We break down everything that a hitter can do to create rather than prevent runs into things like swing decisions, their ability to make contact, their ability to generate power, and these obviously map directly to the things that we train in gym at Driveline and that every org does to improve their offense. Um, Lambo, you had a really cool illustrative example here about how two guys who, if valued conventionally or even using run values, would have been responsible for the same amount of output. Um, but the way they achieved that was very, very different. And this obviously parallels very nicely two pitches that can be valuable for different reasons. So your guys here are Teoscar Hernandez and Jurickson Profar, um, who both accumulated three-ish F-WAR. I believe this is 2024.
Yep.
Um, highly capable players, very different profiles. If you were to look at their run value output in that same stretch, we have them as roughly 32 runs apiece. And it so happens that a nice feature of the way we've done our run values is that about 10 runs here of output maps to a single win, which we think is really nice for how we communicate and share these data. Um, but the way they achieved that was very different. So Teoscar Hernandez, we have with negative 12 contact runs, where in offensive space, negative runs are bad. Pitching, it would be the opposite. But his power more than makes up for it with 36 run value generated by power. So those two plus his swing decisions um, are the component based approach to explaining the 32 runs that he was responsible for. Now, if you go to Profar, a little more well rounded, he had 11.6 runs of swing decision runs, 9.5 of contact runs, and then 11.3 of power runs. And so that nets him, again, about the same output um, on a global level as Teoscar, but the way that he achieved it is very, very different. I think what's interesting here is not just the granularity of what we're doing, but you can make very detailed, like cost benefit type analyses for the sorts of things that intuitively, every coach is trying to train. Like as young as Little League, that you can um, try and up your bat speed or do something just to get more power as a hitter. And the pushback that one might get is, well, you can only do that so much before you start sacrificing contact. And like we all know this, so we're not breaking any ground here by just saying that. But here you can evaluate, well, Teoscar, if you know that your contact profile is going to yield this many negative runs, you can still be as productive a player as a guy who has good contact skills if you make up for it in power to this degree. So it's all pretty well accounted for by these three metrics here.
Yeah, I think this was part of the new models that I was most excited about. Um, the big three, if you've heard of Driveline, good chance you've heard of the big three, which we talk about in hitting, is bat speed, bat to ball skills, and swing decisions. The Red Sox, there was just a good article written about their core four, which is essentially the same three, plus I think they have ball flight as one of them. And for a long time, we've graded these big three on the 2080 scale. So a guy would be viewed at Teoscar, probably 65 grade power and 40 grade bat to ball and 55 grade swing decisions or something like that. For a long time, uh, that's great. It's good to know how each guy's skills are divided, but having them on the run value scale specifically is immensely important in that it's very clear through this analysis that power is king in differentiating the best from the mediocre to the worst. The ceiling for power is uh, like Aaron Judge level. You can produce 90 power runs in a year. Swing decisions and contact, that just isn't the case. Which is someone who watches the game knows that the batted balls are where you have your highest variance. You can ground out, or you could also hit a grand slam. Um, there's just that variance there that having these on that run value scale really tie things back to earth. And I thought anecdotally something that was really interesting running this analysis was a lot of the best hitters in the league had negative contact run value. So guys like Teoscar Hernandez or Shohei Ohtani or Aaron Judge, they weren't exactly excelling in the contact side of things. Uh, and I believe it's due to a willingness to swing through the ball. Swing so that if you hit it, it could be a home run, and otherwise it's okay. We'll move on to the next pitch of the at bat. So I thought that was a really interesting takeaway there, and just nice comparison to be able to break down the specific output of a player's value into the run values. Heshko, do you want to talk a little more in depth about how these are actually calculated and the specific inflection points we're looking at to identify swing decisions, contact, and bat to ball skills?
Yeah, so I think it's I completely agree, and I think it helps. Just to finish off this conversation, I think it also helps us in gym to kind of understand what traits like we should be training guys on. One of those big three. I also think a next step for this. Well, okay, I'll get to that in a second. But so um, if we talk about the first one being swing decisions, the way it currently operates now is I believe it's the run value of a. You might need to correct me on this, Lambo, but
Yeah.
it's gonna be the run value of a swing versus the run value of not a swing. And so basically,
Uh,
if
Little correction. It's the run. If they swung, it's the value of a swing minus the expected value of that event. So probability of swing times value of swing plus probability of take times value of take. Essentially, what we're doing is we're taking the expected value of what should have happened based on uh, the specific components that we talked about previously of a pitch. So every pitch that's thrown, we have a probability of a swing, a probability of a take. So and then specific values tied to those. So we know that the probability of a swing on a curveball that's thrown 55 feet is probably about 10% and 90% chance of a take. We have specific values there that are going to be very closely tied to the value of a strike and the value of a ball because it's likely not being put into play and likely being called a ball. So, with that, if a guy takes that pitch, he's not getting the same credit as if he's taking a pitch that's a few inches off the zone because it's expected that he takes that pitch. The flip side there, if he chases a pitch a few inches off the zone, he's going to be punished way less than if he swung at that pitch that went 55 feet. So it's already accounting for the fact that certain pitches we expect a certain quality of output from the batter. It's already accounting for that and taking what the batter did relative to that. And a really interesting thing we found by doing this is that this metric, total hitter run value, I think you have it in front of you, Marek. It correlates better to next season WRC plus than previous season WRC plus does itself. Do you have the specific numbers there?
Hitter run value to the next season WRC plus. You have an R squared of 0.55. And then you do the same for WRC plus next season WRC plus that falls to 0.45.
Yeah. So extremely interesting to have something essentially on the terms of batting runs, which are used for batting war and F war, uh, but done at a per pitch level. It's not looking at the per plate appearance outcome. Uh, so if a guy strikes out, but he worked a 3-2 count with great swing decisions, that's accounted for. All the intermediate steps to get there. We still learned something about that hitter in that at bat, other than they struck out. So it just kind of proves the value of having these components and flipping them from the hitter side, which is not always super intuitive from uh, the lens of pitch modeling, usually being a pro pitcher thing, but it can also help us for hitter analysis.
I think an interesting place we can take this next also is so right now swing decisions are based on the league average hitter, like it's the like the league average expected swing. I do think an interesting place that we could potentially take this would be to individualize those swing decisions. For example, if a guy maybe an inside pitch against a right-handed sinker inside against a righty is that's probably a pretty bad swing decision for most hitters, right? That's a pitch that is probably going to lead to weak contact. It's probably not going to be able to pitch that you can do a lot of damage on. But if for some reason there's a batter who's really, really good at hitting inside sinkers, he should be swinging at those pitches because he's going to be able to do a lot of damage on that pitch. So being able to individualize that, I think, is one of our next steps that I
Yeah.
think is super interesting. And I think it's important to note this. And I think Lambo, when we talked about component-based models in the first podcast, you mentioned this as well. It's like this isn't something the component-based model approach is not something we invented. This is something that's already existed. I think Pitcher List in particular has a very good model, and I think they do something similar on the hitting side, which credit to
And
the
process
open
plus
source.
metric is
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
yeah, shout out to like everyone in the open source baseball community that helps kind of push this research forward. But yeah, we're doing something similar, I think, with our matchup model, which I don't think we've talked about publicly yet, but that's something that I think is another step forward. And I don't know if that's something we want to talk about this episode, but I think that matchup model is going to be could potentially be the basis of these individualized swing decisions based on where
Yeah,
you specifically do damage.
I think we can talk on the matchup model in a second. I just want to drive it home with the example. I think of like Rafael Devers as the key guy here. That Devers makes bad swing decisions beneath the zone. He's chasing breaking balls under the zone. He also hits the crap out of them. Like he is hitting for power 6 inches beneath the zone. So we currently grade him as making bad decisions when he decides to do that. And it is like it's a decision you have to make. What do you want to say is good or bad to predict future success? The truth is, for maybe a year or two, like we should grade Devers positively or negatively, or no, we should grade Devers positively for swinging at those pitches. When he gets older, when he's 35 or something, it probably is not a good idea to be swinging at those pitches anymore. But there's a certain threshold there, and I think having both values would be very valuable. Heshka, you talked on the matchup model a little bit. You want to talk about high level uh, what that approach is to how we tie together individual pitch values with the hitter effects layered in.
Yeah, so high level, the whole point of the matchup model is beyond just knowing, hey, this is my pitches, this is how my pitches play against righties, this is how my pitches play against lefties. The goal is obviously to individualize that to different hitters, and obviously there's very very different types of hitters, uh, and beyond just like knowing their bat speed or like how much they chase, like there could be hitters that have a certain profile on inside pitches, but a different profile on outside pitches. So knowing not necessarily just what their attributes are, but like how those attributes change as pitches are thrown in different parts of the zone, I think is really important. So that's kind of our goal from the outset of that. But we do run into some issues with small sample sizes, right? We can't just like put all these features into a model and like expect the model to parse what's going on. So we have to get a little bit creative with how we go about including hitter effects. So from a high level, the way we're doing it is we're using the pitchers base level pitch values across the zone as kind of our ground truth value. So like there's taking myself as example, I throw a sinker, four seam, cutter, slider. So I would have basically four different heat maps, one for each pitch against righties and lefties, basically on how these pitches are expected to play. And then for each batter, what we do is we go through each pitch that they've seen, and we basically use the component based model as the Bayesian prior, if you will, right? It's basically what's expected of a batter in that given situation. So if I swing at a pitch that's, maybe I swing at a pitch at the top of the zone that has a zero point 0.8 expected swing. I swung at it, but it was a very high likelihood that I was going to swing at it anyways, just based on what happened. So I would only get 0.2, basically. I would get the difference for that location and for surrounding locations at a diminishing rate, because obviously you're not going to be exactly the same, and it's not going to be exactly the same. But we do think that if the pitch was like pretty close, the batter also probably would have been fairly likely to also make that same swing decision. So on a swing decisions level, we can go through and say like how many times did you swing, and when you swung, like what was the expected swing of all those? How many times did you take? What was the expected swing of all those? And if you consistently take pitches that have high expected swing values, or the opposite, if you consistently swing at pitches that have high expected take values, I believe the quintessential example of this is Javi Baez on sliders that are way out of the zone. Those have very, very low expected swing, but Javi Baez swings at them. So if I'm a pitcher, I should be able to recognize that and adjust my game plan, because what I think is the traditional expected run value of a pitch in that location, it assumes a really low expected swing. But if I know the batter is very likely to swing, I probably should be spamming the pitch there, because it's very likely to get a whiff, very likely to get weak contact if contact is made. We can basically do that for all of these big three. We can do that for swing decisions, we can do that for contact quality, and we can do that for damage. And that allows us to build out these matchup models, which it's not perfect. It's not, but I think it's much better than other approaches that or other attempts that we've made at kind of doing this. And it does incorporate this pitcher's ground truth, but it also includes what batters tend to do against pitches based on the predicted attributes of those pitch. So I'm pretty excited about the matchup model.
Yeah.
And well, for all these statistics, attribution is typically very hard. If you think about something like win probability, where you're taking differences between states and then attributing all the changes in the win probability to the batter or the pitcher in that given moment, and saying like all the credit or punishment for that change falls on you. I thought you phrased it great, Hedgeko, where you're saying you're taking kind of an event that has an 80% probability of happening and like actively moving it to become a 100% event. Like by doing it this way, we're rewarding people for making positive EV decisions or actions or having the skill to kind of do that on a repeated basis. And I think that's a hallmark of a very good metric. And one thing that I thought was kind of an in the weeds, but you know, funny way of thinking about it. We have like a bit of a similar trait in how we at least used to or conventionally think about seam shifted wake, where you look at the differences between expected and observed axis, let's say, and that is your seam shifted wake metric, where everything that explains the difference between the spin axis at release versus the spin axis when it crosses the plate. We know that the effect here is probably entirely explained by seam shift. So let's call that our metric for this phenomenon. Like let's take the full observed versus expected difference and ascribe it to this. And if you wanted to be technical and kind of drill down on whatever residuals there are that aren't just that one effect, there could be a bunch of other things at play here. And I was looking at our swing decision definition or swing decision run value definition here, and was going to poke a small hole in it, which is to say that if you are rewarding guys for swinging at good pitches and not swinging at bad pitches, there is one small gap here, which is you can have guys who are deciding to swing at bad pitches, but are just elite at check swing ability and stopping before they complete a swing that would appear as though they're making elite swing decisions. They're actually bad at swing decisions, but just are great at stopping their bat before it crosses the plate. So you could do that kind of thing with any of these metrics, but obviously I'm exaggerating here. What we
If they have that
are doing
profile,
here.
they win. I'm not modeling that.
Yeah. No, there's always a level deeper to go, and I think we're pretty robust to the things that matter. But thinking
I have
of
a
it
feeling
way,
that would be a very correlated metric with damage run values, for the record. I have a hard time believing someone could do a lot of damage consistently and also be really good at check swinging.
It's all the forearms, man. You know, that's where it comes from.
Dan Ugla, elite check swinger. At least checks the forearms box. Sweet.
Okay, so going from there into kind of our last subtopic here, what feeds into these models? How are they different at all, or if at all, from the prior regime? And get a little bit into pitch physics, because those matter a heck of a lot for modeling.
I finally want to circle back to the point I was gonna make as my second point a while ago. So obviously these component-based approaches, the component-based approach allows us to dig deeper into like what makes a certain pitch successful in terms of outcomes, right? Like, is it good at generating ground balls? Is it good at generating swings and misses, called strikes? We also want to do the same, especially from our training perspective. We want to understand also which components of that pitch allow it to have that success or allow it to be successful. So an issue with stuff models that we've recognized in the past, and I know a lot of other people in the baseball sphere have recognized this. This is very influenced by some of Max Bay's work. And I think the idea is that a lot of features, I know Tom Tango has talked about this before as well. A lot of people just throw a million features into a stuff model, where multiple of those features are not the same, but they're very collinear, I believe is the official stats term. So, if you have, for example, release point, velo, vertical break, and VAA in the model. Well, VAA is created by those other three along with the location of the pitch. So you're basically describing that effect in multiple different ways. And so it makes it very, very difficult to understand what is actually being contributed by what feature. So from our perspective, we wanted to basically make these features, whatever we're feeding into this model, as orthogonal as possible. We want to know, is it actually this increase in velocity that's causing this pitch to be more successful? Is it the change in the release position? Is it the change in the horizontal vertical acceleration, not movement, which is where we're using accelerations? But knowing exactly what it is about the pitch that makes it more successful also helps us in our ability to train it to athletes.
And this isn't something you can perfectly achieve, nor do we think we did, but we think we made steps in the right direction, and we were extremely picky in what we fed into the model this go around, and made sure that it had a place there describing or accounting for something that was not previously accounted for.
I
Yeah, I
think
think.
And
it's
so, yeah,
Go ahead.
no,
Marek, you
just
got
that
it.
it's worth underscoring, saying out loud that we're advocating for a shift from thinking of movement in terms of accelerations in each dimension, and rather than inches of break in horizontal or vertical space. I think you look at how we used to think about or discuss breaking pitches through time. At one moment, the key characteristics were the spin characteristics, and that's how we talked about each of these different pitches as having potential for very good movement. More recently, as I said, the convention was to think about in V break and H break space. We're saying here right now that thinking in XYZ accelerations is the most orthogonal and the most effective way to model these aspects of the pitch physics.
Yeah, and I'll talk on accelerations real quick, then can pass it to you for transverse accelerations, Heshka. That work? Well,
Yeah, it works for me.
um, so yeah, the main reason for this, why using accelerations is better, or more accurately describing the pitcher skill of imparting forces on the ball rather than break, is that take the example of a 20 IVB fastball. When you throw 60 or 65, it takes very little acceleration in the Z direction to get to 20 IVB. As you go up in velocity, you have to have much higher acceleration in order to get to that 20 IVB mark. So when we're using a model, something like XG Boost, that's tree based, has no knowledge of physics, it sees inputs that are numbers, it could be tricked by something like this. So step one was, all right, let's throw out the specific brake profile and let's use accelerations instead. And then going deeper down the rabbit hole, accelerations are biased by location, which for a stuff model is not something you want. So, Heshker, you want to talk about how we transform those X and
Yeah.
Z components?
Well, so just to add on to what you said, I think a key issue, and I don't think we've done any formal studies on this. I don't know if I've seen any formal studies on this, but that thrower slowing. So it's not. It's at first the way we were thinking about this is that movement is biased in some way by velocity, and Ellen Nathan corrected us. And basically, for any given spin to velocity ratio, the movement is actually pretty much the same. But the way that what we eventually came to realize is that it's not so much that it's biased by velocity, it's more so that slow throwing pitchers can throw with a higher spin to velocity ratio, which means that they can impart more movement for any given pitch. So there's like this slight nuance there where guys, when you're throwing 50 miles an hour, it's way easier to throw a pitch with 25, 27 IVB because it's way easier to have a higher. Basically, the relationship between velo and spin doesn't necessarily increase in a linear fashion. If your spin to velocity ratio is 25, if you increase 5, 10, 15 miles an hour, your spin rate is not necessarily going to increase by that same factor. So
Relative to your
the
velocity.
relative to your velocity. So that's where we kind of get into this nuance where we have 12-year-olds throwing pitches with 25 IVB and having insane stuff grades, and it's it's not exactly what we want. So I think there's like this understanding that we kind of came to that's like, okay, that makes sense. In terms of transverse accelerations, this is a little bit in the weeds. I think the main thing to realize here is the acceleration values that we get from Statcast are in an objective plane, where home plate is x across z up, and then y is the axis that runs from home plate to the pitcher's mound. So you could have guys that throw, and I know Michael Rosen basically just wrote an article that detailed some of this as well. But you could throw pitches depending on what side of the rubber you're on or what side of the plate you throw it to. That could be the exact same pitch, but they have very different, not very different, slightly different AX and AZ values. So the AZ and AX values are not actually reflective of the quote unquote transverse acceleration. Transverse acceleration in this case just means acceleration that contributes to movement. That contributes to movement essentially. There's obviously gravity that affects the movement of the ball, drag that affects the movement of the ball. We remove those factors, and we're trying to isolate only the effects of basically the Magnus force, which is spin, and then any non-Magnus forces that cause movement, which, as Marek alluded to earlier, is seam-shifted wake. So transverse acceleration, all it's doing is changing from the objective plane of, the objective space, objective coordinate system of the stadium, of the field, and putting it relative to the ball flight. So saying like if the ball had gone on its original trajectory with no spin, and it just would have followed a straight line, obviously with the effects of gravity and drag as well, where would it have gone? And then transverse acceleration is anything that causes deviation from that line, whether it's due to Magnus force, which is the spin, or whether it's due to non-Magnus forces such as seam-shifted wake.
Yeah, a very small adjustment, but a necessary one if you are trying to, like we tried to do, extract the pure things a pitcher is doing to the ball. A necessary adjustment there. Yeah, do we got anything more on pitch physics or modeling in general, or we want to call it?
Get Alan Nathan on the guest circuit.
Yeah, shout out Alan Nathan. He was super helpful during this.
Extremely helpful, yes.
Yeah, we kept bugging him, and he was more than willing to help. Very appreciative of that.
I think the last thing I'll mention, and this is something we can definitely expand on in future podcasts too, is I think there's this danger. I've heard this articulated in a variety of ways, but where things that can't be quantified, I think this is called the quantification bias, something along those lines. But like people give undue importance to things that can be quantified, and not necessarily undue importance to things that can be quantified, but they treat things that can't be quantified as irrelevant when that's not necessarily the case. And so our models are not perfect. We don't account for everything. Our ultimate goal, our ultimate dream is basically a model that's a sum of a bunch of different layers, right? So we have the stuff layer, we have the location layer, we have the pitch sequencing layer, we have the deception layer, we have the familiarity layer. So we have all these layers that we can eventually add and account for as many different factors as we can, but we'll never be able to account for all of them. So I think it's just important to recognize as people who are creating models and using models that just because something's not reflected in our current models. So perfect example of this is Arsenal effects, which, we've talked about a ton. Stuff models do not account for Arsenal interactions at all. They do in some way, which is like velo and movement differential from the fastball. But there's no understanding of, hey, like this cutter's acting as a bridge pitch and it's improving my sweeper, my sinker. Now we have these Arsenal models, which are at an additional layer to that. But if you didn't know these Arsenal effects happened and you're like, okay, the stuff model says this, you'd be missing a piece of the puzzle. So I think just as something to keep in mind for ourselves and for anybody who's listening, who's interested in modeling yourself, is like recognizing the blind spots of your models and either working to create ways to move beyond that, finding ways to model those blind spots, or at the very least recognizing them and understanding that, hey, like I'm not always seeing the exact full picture, even though I am closer to seeing the full picture than anybody else.
Well, and tying that together to a point you made a second ago about orthogonality, when you're modeling things that have many different layers or components of them, and you don't ensure orthogonality, it can be hard to kind of look at, the sum variance of all those layers and know exactly how much of unexplained variance you have. what the size of your residuals are. Because mathematically, if you have a bunch of collinearity, a bunch of correlated layers, and you try to sum up how much explained variance those account for, they can account for more than 100% because of all the effects that they have among them, that sum up to more than the total variance that you're seeing. And so if you've properly orthogonalized all your layers, and I know we're getting a little math speaky here, um, and you've stacked all these things together that you know can explain some portion of everything you're seeing, you'll have a much better handle on, okay, with these four things, I have 95% of the picture modeled out, and the size of my unknowns is just 5%. That contextualizes how much insight you've generated in the first place, because it's a much different story than saying, well, shoot, I thought I have pitching solved and it only explains 45% of everything that I'm seeing. Well, you got
Mhm.
a heck of a lot more work to do before you can call it a determined um, system. So
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.